Okay, let's catch up now with our political panel for the day to pick through some running issues in national affairs. And joining us from Perth, where it's not a public holiday today, Labor MP Josh Wilson, and from Adelaide, where it is, I believe, Liberal MP James Stephens. Welcome back to both of you. And Josh, why don't we start with you first of all? Richard Marles's meeting in Singapore with his Chinese counterpart. Where do you think this leaves your government as far as future ministerial contact on other fronts, trade in particular, is concerned?
Well, good afternoon, Greg and James and all your viewers. Look, I just think it's a further example in the recent weeks of a newly elected Albanese Labor government of how Australia is re-engaging with the world, and that can only be positive. We're doing that on a sensible, sober, resolute fashion in pursuit of Australia's national interests. And you can't pursue Australia's national interests by taking a position of angry isolation, which was the stance practiced by the previous government.
It wasn't. You don't think it might have been principled protest rather than angry isolation?
Well, as Dennis Richardson just explained, I mean, there are big matters of geopolitical importance and strategic contest going on at the moment, but the United States and Japan and South Korea and other countries have continued to have dialogue with China, and we need to be able to have dialogue with China, just as we need to engage with other countries in our region more broadly. Now, Labor has set out to do that. The question for the new opposition is, are they going to continue to risk Australia's reputation and our national security by playing silly, divisive, domestic political games in their own self-interest, or are they going to be genuinely constructive? Because Australia has suffered as a result of being in that self-interested, angry isolation under the former government. We are turning a corner, and it's something that I think all sides of politics need to be broadly supportive of.
All right, why don't we take it over then to James Stephens. James, I know you are very familiar with the issues at play here. Do you see any risk, any downside to Richard Marles's initial conversation, but particularly if it is to grow from that, to expand to other levels of ministerial contact? Is that a problem?
No, look, I obviously welcome it, and it's not as if the previous Morrison government was not seeking this sort of dialogue with various senior Chinese officials. My colleague from South Australia, Simon Birmingham, as the Trade Minister, was regularly seeking to have a re-engagement with his counterpart, and on the Chinese side, for the last few years, that hasn't been possible. I think Dennis Richardson made a sensible point earlier in the day. Obviously, a change of government means that some of the history that was around the personalities over the last few years on both sides has presented this opportunity. So I welcome this level of engagement from the Chinese Defence Minister and other engagement. It's very important. But I would just pull Josh up on one point. I mean, this all effectively started when we called for an independent international inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus pandemic, which at the time, I believe, the Labor Party supported. That did trigger some frostiness in the relationship from the Chinese side, but we don't resile at all for the need for that inquiry, and I would be quite surprised if the new government is now saying they don't support it.
You got a position on that, Josh? I mean, there are a number of irritants, weren't there? There's the one James mentions, but there was also foreign interference laws, there was Huawei's exclusion from 5G network. I mean, can you guarantee that the Albanese government would hold the line on all these things, particularly an international pandemic investigation?
Well, look, I guess two things, Greg. One, the Labor government is going to pursue Australia's national interest in a resolute fashion. It's going to do it soberly, cautiously. It's going to do it in a measured way through engagement. Now, James and I can go back over the previous 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8, 9 years, pick our own facts to tell a particular story. James referred to one aspect of the relationship. There are a number of others that you mentioned. I don't think that there's any doubt, though, that what I described before as that sort of self-inflicted angry isolation was a feature of the way that the previous government decided to conduct international relations, and it almost always had a domestic aspect that was sought to be exploited for the interests, narrow domestic political interests of the previous government. And Dennis Richardson has just referred to the op-ed that was written by the now leader of the opposition, which kind of continues in that vein. And so far, what we've seen from the new opposition is a bit like Dobermans with amnesia. A lot of aggression, not a lot of responsibility for all of the things that they practiced in the previous 9 years, which have put us in the position that we're in regionally, that have put us in the position with respect to submarines and a range of other things that the new Labor government is now trying to address.
Yeah, James, so that gives us the pivot, I suppose, over to the issue of submarines in particular. Since Josh raised it, Peter Dutton's op-ed, are you entirely comfortable with how far that went? Dennis Richardson is getting a few references in our discussion this afternoon. He indicated that in his long experience, there was at least one sort of line crossed there, one no-go area was entered into. Are you comfortable with all aspects of that piece?
Look, I am, and I think it was important to put that on the public record. I think it effectively followed an attempt by Richard Marles to cast some doubt over the future nuclear submarine program and the delivery timelines. And when new governments come in, they try to under-promise and over-deliver. They get their incoming government brief, and I think Minister Marles was attempting to put the most negative outlook on the future nuclear submarine program, and I think it was appropriate for Peter Dutton, from the perspective he had as being the previous Defence Minister, to clarify that option exists and people should be aware of it publicly. And if the new government are either going to pursue it or not, they should be honest and open and accountable to people about that. So I think that's what was achieved from that opinion piece. I'm pleased to know that the government was working on that contingency, and I hope the new government continues on with it. And thankfully, we now know that the option can be pursued, and they can keep the people of Australia updated on that in the months and years to come.
All right, quick one, because neither of you in your home states have much skin in this game, but just a quick one on gas and energy. We've been reporting this hour that because of the cold weather, New South Wales and Queensland are at risk of load shedding. Something's going horribly wrong in the East Coast market, isn't it? I'll start with you, James. You're a little closer to the action than Josh is out there in Perth, but this really is the clearest evidence yet that something needs to be fixed quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, Greg. Well, look, in South Australia, we're part of the NEM, the National Energy Market. So, and of course, it brings back terrible memories for me as a South Australian. In 2016, we had the statewide blackout for a little over 4 hours, but also even in 2017, we had major load shedding. I think it peaked at around 120,000 residential homes lost their electricity for a period of time due to problems with meeting demand in the system. Obviously, an earlier guest of yours has taken through some of the issues, and they are multiple, but we clearly have a medium and long-term problem to address here, because no expert suggests that the challenges we're facing right now are going to be short-term, and particularly when it comes to domestic gas supply. This is going to be a problem that's continuing, and particularly while we have all these various moratoria in place that are not allowing us to fully exploit the gas reserves that we've got in this country. I think most Australians would be appalled if we let ourselves get to a situation where, as one of the largest gas exporters on the planet, we equally can't provide our own domestic gas consumption needs. So there's clearly need for significant reform and change to the system.
It does sound absurd on a few levels, but Josh, I imagine for you West Australians, you might be wanting to say something that a lot of other West Australians have been saying in recent days. It's kind of like, we told you so, or follow our lead. You're isolated from all of this, but pretty satisfied with your own settings out there.
Well, yeah, a former state Labor government looked into the crystal ball and saw where things were headed, and I think took a very sensible decision to make sure that a resource like gas, which fundamentally belongs to all Australians, actually is available for Australians to use and benefit from. And at the moment, in the East Coast, that isn't the case. I mean, my understanding today is that AEMO has set a price cap because prices are going through the roof, and then as a result, some energy generators are literally choosing to not put energy into the market because that price is too low for them, even though it's relatively high in recent times. This is an example of how the free market can go badly wrong. I mean, it's not, as James said, a matter of whether we've got enough gas. We have more than enough gas. We're one of the largest gas producers in the world. It's that the system is badly shaped and badly regulated and is delivering this problem. One of the reasons it's badly shaped is because over 9 years of the previous government, they could not bring themselves to settle a national energy policy. I mean, how can you be in government for 9 years and not settle a national energy policy? It is one of the largest failures of the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison administration, and it's put us in this position. At the moment, we're experiencing in relation to gas and energy generation. I'll tell you what, there's another big problem that we are not yet confronting around liquid fuel insecurity. Mercifully, that's not something that we're dealing with at the moment, but we are in a parlous state when it comes to liquid fuel insecurity. And if geopolitical or international events should put a squeeze on the availability of liquid fuel, we would really see some suffering in this country.
Well, perish the thought on that one. Might be one that we can explore at greater depth in future conversations, because time's pretty much beaten us for today. Josh Wilson and James Stephens, thanks to both of you for coming back on Afternoon Briefing. We'll catch up again before too long.
Thanks, Greg. Cheers.